I believed my mother when she said we were taking a break from Christmas. I told my 7-year-old niece our grandparents had the flu, and she nodded with sad acceptance. But that night, scrolling Instagram, my sister's story lit up the screen. Our parents' house glowing like a winter magazine, tables set for a feast, strangers wrapped in matching sweaters, and 2 young women labelled family. My chest caved. Under a tarp sat a truck I'd worked overtime for months to buy as a gift for my father. Instead of ribbon, I wrapped it in truth. 73 minutes later, fists hammered on my door. The smell of diesel and cold metal clung to my clothes as I crawled out from under the rig. My hands were blackened with grease, a familiar armour that said I belonged in this depot more than in any boardroom my parents ever cherished. I was wiping them on a rag when my phone buzzed. The screen lit up with a name that still had the power to tighten my chest: Mom. I hesitated before answering, already bracing myself for whatever criticism was coming. "Hi, Mum," I said, pressing the phone to my ear. "Elena," she began in that clipped, careful tone she used when she wanted to sound gentle but really wasn't. "Your father and I have decided we'll be taking a break from Christmas this year. Something quieter, something more refined." The word refined landed like a hammer. It was the same word she'd used 100 times before to remind me that I was messy, loud, unbecoming. My throat tightened. "What about Maya?" I asked, glancing at the photo I kept taped to my toolbox. My niece with her toothy smile and crooked pigtails. "She's been making gifts for you both at school. She's excited to see you." There was a pause, long enough for me to hear the whir of the shop fans in the background. "Children can be overwhelming at formal gatherings," Mom said finally. "Perhaps we'll see her after the holidays, when things are calmer." I gripped the phone tighter, my fingers streaking it with oil. "So, you don't want us there? You understand, don't you? We'll send her presents in the mail. Have a nice holiday, Elena." The line went dead before I could speak again. I stood in the middle of the garage, heart pounding. For years, I had been the odd one out, the mechanic daughter with calloused hands instead of a degree and a corner office. But this wasn't about me anymore. This was about Maya, the little girl I had promised my dying sister I would protect. And my parents had just dismissed her like she was noise in the background. That evening, I tried to make it better. I picked Maya up from daycare, bundled her into her favourite red coat, and listened as she bubbled with excitement. "Can I wear my sparkle shoes to Grandma's? Do you think Grandpa will like the picture I drew?" I swallowed hard. "Sweetheart, Grandma and Grandpa are sick with the flu. We can't go this year. We don't want to catch their germs, right?" Her face fell. She stared down at her mittens. "But I made them presents." I forced cheer into my voice. "We'll give them when they feel better. And you know what? That means we can have pizza for Christmas and watch superhero movies all night." She brightened a little, but I saw the disappointment linger in her eyes. Children sense the truth more than we think. After she went to bed, I sat at the kitchen table listening to the quiet hum of the fridge, my own thoughts louder than any machine. I wanted to believe maybe Mum was telling the truth, that they really needed rest, that there was no malice. But my gut told me otherwise. I opened Instagram, more out of habit than anything. The first story at the top was from Sloane, my younger sister. I tapped and the screen exploded with light. Our parents' house shimmered like a holiday postcard. Strings of lights blinked in perfect rhythm. A massive tree glittered with glass ornaments. The dining room was set for at least a dozen. fine china gleaming under chandeliers. My breath caught. Slide after slide revealed what taking a break really meant. Guests in evening wear clinking champagne glasses. My parents beaming beside Sloane, who leaned into a man old enough to be her father, his arms snug around her waist. And then came the photo that hollowed me out, a family portrait in front of the fireplace, captioned, "So blessed to spend Christmas with family." There were my parents, radiant, Sloane, glowing in designer red, and two young blonde women I had never seen before, smiling like they'd belonged for years. The caption called them Graham's daughters, except they weren't daughters, not in the way that mattered. I stared at the screen until my eyes burned. They hadn't cancelled Christmas. They hadn't wanted me or Maya. They had replaced us. I closed the app, but the images seared into my mind. My hands trembled as I pressed my palms flat on the table, trying to steady my breath. Outside, snow began to fall, soft, against the dark window. Inside, I felt stripped bare. For the first time, I understood what it meant to be truly unwanted by the people who should have loved me most. The images on my phone still burned behind my eyelids long after I set it face down on the table. My chest felt hollow, the kind of ache that made every breath scrape. I closed my eyes and, without meaning to, drifted backward in memory. The last truly happy Christmas had been 6 years ago. My sister Rachel was still alive then. She had brought over a tray of gingerbread men she and little Maya had decorated together. Some had one eye bigger than the other, some leaned so far to the side they looked drunk. But Rachel had laughed until her eyes watered, and Maya had clapped her flour-dusted hands with glee. Our parents had been there too, not perfect but at least present, drinking coffee and complimenting the decorations. For a few hours, the house had felt like home. That was the year Rachel had pulled me aside, her face serious in a way I rarely saw. "Promise me," she had whispered, holding my hands in hers. "If anything ever happens to me, you'll look after Maya. She deserves love that isn't conditional." I'd laughed then, brushed it off, but 2 years later, when the accident came and Rachel didn't walk away from the twisted wreck, those words echoed like a vow. From that day, Maya wasn't just my niece, she was my responsibility, my heartbeat. I opened my eyes, blinking against the sting. My gaze landed on the small pile of presents stacked near the couch. Maya had wrapped each one herself, crooked edges taped with too much Scotch tape. The top package was a shoebox, covered in silver paper, lumpy with the shape of whatever treasures she had stuffed inside. I reached for it, lifting the lid carefully so I wouldn't ruin her work. Inside were crayon drawings, a plastic dinosaur with a missing tail, and a handmade card. The letters wobbled, some backwards, the spelling imperfect but earnest. "Grandpa, don't forget me." My throat closed. I pressed the card against my chest, fighting the surge of emotion that threatened to spill over. She had made that for him, believing he would smile and hold her and tell her she mattered. And instead, he had chosen strangers with perfect teeth and expensive shoes. I stood and paced the small living room, energy crackling through me like live wire, the truck, my secret. For 4 months I'd eaten ramen, worked every overtime shift I could, rebuilt transmissions in Joe's garage long after midnight, even sold off my game console and tools. Every dollar went into one goal, buying Dad the truck he'd been dreaming of, so maybe finally he would look at me with pride. It sat now under a tarp in Joe's lot, silver paint gleaming even in the dull winter light, engine purring like thunder when I turned the key. A bow waited in my closet, big and red and ridiculous. The plan had been simple. Drive it over on Christmas morning, park it in their driveway, send Maya to the door with the keys. I had imagined Dad's eyes lighting up, his arms pulling us both into a rare embrace. That dream shattered when I saw those photos. My gift wasn't welcome. We weren't welcome. I grabbed my phone and opened the camera roll. I drove to Joe's lot with Maya, still asleep in the back seat, the heater humming. She stirred, mumbling in her sleep, and I tucked the blanket tighter around her. Then I stepped out into the snow and pulled the tarp away. The truck glistened under the grey sky. I filmed every angle, the polished wheels, the spotless leather interior, the engine that whirred when I pressed the ignition. My hands shook, but my voice stayed steady as I spoke into the lens. Merry Christmas. I was going to surprise you with this, Dad. 4 months of sweat, sleepless nights, and sacrifice. But since I'm apparently not refined enough for your holiday, I guess I'll keep it. Thanks for reminding me where Maya and I stand. When I finished, I stitched in one final image, the card from Maya, her shaky letters pleading not to be forgotten. It broke me to include it, but it was the truth he needed to see. I sent the video to my father's phone, then I blocked his number, my thumb pressing harder than it needed to. Back at the apartment, Maya stirred awake, rubbing her eyes. "Did Santa come?" she asked, voice small. "Yeah, sweetheart," I said, forcing a smile. "Santa came." She padded off toward her toys, humming a tune, while I sat at the kitchen table staring at the clock. Each tick felt like a drumbeat in my chest. 73 minutes later, fists pounded against the front door. The pounding rattled the thin wood of my apartment door, each strike vibrating through the floorboards. Maya, still groggy from sleep, blinked up at me from the couch. I forced a smile and smoothed her hair. "Go play in your room for a bit, honey. Use your crayons." She nodded, trusting, and padded away in her pajamas, the soles of her socks whispering against the linoleum. I waited a moment longer, steadying my breath before opening the door. My father Thomas stood there, shoulders hunched against the cold, his face blotched red with fury. Beside him, my mother Marjorie tightened her scarf around her throat, her expression pinched, lips drawn in the permanent line of disapproval I knew too well. Neither of them said hello. My father shoved a phone toward me. The screen paused on the video I'd sent. "Where is it?" he demanded. His voice cracked with impatience. "The truck. Where did you put it?" I blinked at him, feigning confusion. "Truck? You mean the one I bought with overtime hours and missed dinners? That one?" "Don't play games, Elena," Marjorie snapped, stepping closer. "If you filmed it, then you have it. Don't humiliate this family further by hiding things that don't belong to you." Heat rushed to my face, sharp and uncontrollable. "Don't belong to me?" I repeated. "I'm the one who scraped together every cent to buy it. I haven't given it to anyone, and if you think you're entitled to it, then maybe you need to rethink what belongs to you." Thomas's jaw worked, the muscles twitching. "You were going to give it to me, that was the plan. You can't take back a gift just because you're hurt." The audacity left me breathless for a moment. "A gift isn't a gift until it's given," I shot back, "and you uninvited us from Christmas. You made sure Maya sat at home while strangers filled her place at your table. Do you have any idea what that did to her?" Marjorie folded her arms, her eyes flashing with irritation. "Don't twist this into martyrdom. You've embarrassed us enough, Elena. Your choices, your job, the way you live, people talk. Do you think I enjoy defending you? This entire spectacle with the truck video only proves my point. You've made the family look small." Something in me cracked. I've made the family look small? My voice rose raw with disbelief. You paraded 2 women you barely know in front of the entire town and called them family while you shut the door on your granddaughter. That's not refinement, Mom. That's cruelty. Thomas's gaze flicked toward the hallway where Maya's door was shut. Maya, he called, his voice softening unnaturally. Sweetheart, come see Grandpa. Grandpa wants to talk to you. That was it. Fury surged up my spine, searing and uncontrollable. I stepped between him and the hallway, my arms spread like a barrier. Don't you dare, I hissed. You don't get to discard her like trash one day and then use her as leverage the next. You don't call for her now because you think it'll win you sympathy. She is not your bargaining chip. Marjorie's cheeks flushed a blotchy red. You're overreacting. You always have. If you would just act like the daughter you were raised to be, none of this would be happening. We wouldn't be in this mess. I let out a bitter laugh, one that tasted like rust on my tongue. This mess? You mean the mess where I broke my back to keep a promise to my sister? Where I raised her daughter while you two looked the other way because it didn't fit the picture you wanted to paint? That mess? The hallway door creaked open slightly, a sliver of Maya's worried eyes peeking through. I softened instantly, gesturing gently for her to stay inside. It's okay, sweetheart, stay in your room, I said, never taking my eyes off my parents. Thomas clenched his fists at his sides, his shoulders stiffening as though he might lunge forward. But then he caught the steel in my expression, the fury burning there, and something in him faltered. He looked older than I had ever seen him, but no less stubborn. You're making a mistake, he said quietly. No, I whispered back, voice shaking but firm. The mistake was thinking you would ever see me, or Maya, as enough. Silence fell heavy between us, broken only by the hum of the heating unit and the distant sound of Maya's crayons scratching paper in the other room. Finally, Thomas lowered his hand from the doorframe. Marjorie shook her head with a final look of disdain, then tugged at his arm. Together they turned and walked down the hall, their footsteps echoing like hollow drums. I shut the door slowly, pressing my back against it as the weight of the confrontation settled into my chest. My hands trembled, but my resolve had never felt sharper. They had come not to apologize, not to reconcile, but to claim what they thought was theirs. And I had finally told them no. I had barely taken 2 steps toward the kitchen when a sharp knock rattled again, softer this time, but persistent. My gut clenched. I opened the door only a crack, and there stood Sloane. Perfect hair despite the falling snow, coat belted tight, eyes darting nervously between me and the empty hallway. Elena, she whispered, her voice pitched low. Can we talk? I let out a humorless laugh. Now you want to talk? After posting your glamorous little slideshow while Maya cried herself to sleep? Her shoulders sagged. She slipped inside quickly, glancing toward the closed door where Maya played. I didn't mean for it to go that far. I just did what Mum asked. The words hit harder than I expected. You did what Mum asked. Tell me you're not admitting what I think you are. Sloane bit her lip, then nodded. Those girls, Piper and Lydia, they're not Graham's daughters. Mum wanted the pictures to look fuller, more respectable. She told me to find someone to round out the family. Graham paid for it, but it was my idea to hire them. I'm sorry. For a long moment, silence pressed down between us. I could hear the faint crackle of the radiator, the scratch of crayons on paper from Maya's room. My hands curled into fists. I knew, I said finally, my voice low and trembling with anger. The moment I saw those photos, I knew they weren't family. Do you have any idea what that feels like? To be erased, replaced for the sake of appearances? Sloane's face crumpled, but before she could answer, footsteps echoed from down the hall. Thomas and Marjorie had stopped, turned back, and now they stood in the doorway again, their presence filling the room with icy disapproval. "Elena," Marjorie said sharply, "that's enough." I turned to them, my voice cutting through the air. She told me the truth. You hired strangers to play family while you barred your own granddaughter from the door. The words hung there, heavy and undeniable. For once, even Thomas didn't speak, his jaw clenched, eyes flicking to the floor. Marjorie's lips pressed into a line so thin it almost disappeared. The air grew so taut it felt like it might snap. My chest rose and fell with sharp, uneven breaths. "You should go," I said finally, pointing toward the hallway. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then, slowly, my parents turned, their footsteps echoing again, this time retreating for good. Sloane followed after them, her shoulders hunched, her face pale. They left me standing in the entryway, the silence behind them more suffocating than their words. I closed the door, locked it, and pressed my forehead against the wood. My pulse pounded in my ears. The apartment felt cavernous, though it was small, as if the space they had occupied was still heavy with everything unsaid. For 2 days, the quiet lingered. I focused on Maya, keeping her world intact. We built blanket forts, watched animated movies, ate popcorn for dinner. Outwardly, it was normal. Inside, my thoughts churned like gears stripped of oil. Then, on the 3rd morning, I stepped outside to drive Maya to school. The icy air bit my skin, and the sight before me stole the breath from my lungs. My car sat low, tilted awkwardly on all 4 corners. I dropped the keys from my hand and stumbled forward. Every tyre had been slashed, not punctured, but shredded in angry gashes, and carved into the driver's side door in jagged letters, "Loser." The word screamed back at me in the morning light. My hands shook as I reached out, tracing the grooves with my fingertips. The cold metal stung, but the deeper sting came from knowing this wasn't random, this was personal. Behind me, Maya tugged at my coat, her backpack dangling from her shoulders. "Auntie, what happened to the car?" I swallowed hard, forcing my voice steady. "Someone played a very mean prank, sweetheart." Her brow furrowed in confusion, but she didn't press. She simply slipped her small hand into mine, and that simple gesture nearly broke me. I knew in my gut who was behind it. My parents might not have held the knife, but someone in their orbit had. Someone who thought they were teaching me a lesson, punishing me for standing up to them. And the cruelest part was that I could imagine my father's voice agreeing, maybe this will make her see reason. Anger flared hot in my chest, chasing away the chill of the winter air. They hadn't just shut us out. They were willing to destroy what little we had. And in that moment, I understood. My family wasn't just ashamed of me. They were ready to break me. The word carved into my car followed me inside like a shadow I couldn't shake. "Loser." It rang in my ears while Maya sat cross-legged on the couch, colouring as if nothing had happened. I didn't want her to see me fall apart, so I excused myself to the bathroom, gripping the sink until the cold porcelain steadied me. By noon, I had filed a police report. The officer took photos, asked routine questions, and promised to keep an eye out. But I saw the flicker of doubt in his gaze. Another vandalised car in a small town, low on the list of priorities. He didn't say it, but I knew the chances of anyone being held accountable were slim. When the door shut behind him, the apartment felt smaller, heavier. I called Joe, my best friend and the one person who had stood beside me through every scraped knuckle and sleepless night in the garage. She showed up within 20 minutes, her work boots still dusted with salt from the snow. "Jesus, Elena," she muttered, crouching by the tyres. Her gloved fingers traced the gashes. "This wasn't random. Someone wanted you to feel it." "I know," I said, my voice hoarse, "and I know who." Joe's eyes snapped to mine. She didn't ask for names. She didn't need to. She'd heard enough stories over the years to fill in the blanks. "So, what's the plan?" I exhaled slowly, staring at the ruined car. "If they want to play games with my life, fine. But I'm not going to fight back with knives or fists. I'll use what I have." "And what's that?" "My network," I said simply. For years, I'd built quiet connections in every corner of this town. Being a mechanic meant more than fixing engines. It meant knowing who owed favours, who whispered over coffee, who carried stories back to the country club. I hadn't used that knowledge for anything more than cheap parts and quick turnarounds. But now it was my turn. The first call I made was to Tony, who owned the only decent garage in my parents' neighbourhood. He had known me since I was 16, had laughed when I asked for work experience in his shop, had watched me grow into the mechanic I was. When I explained what had happened, his voice hardened. "Your dad comes to me with that old F-150 every couple months, swearing he can't afford a replacement," Tony said. "If he shows up again, I'll make sure people know exactly how his daughter managed to buy one while he cried poor." "Thanks, Tony," I said softly. "That's all I ask." The next call went to Beth, a receptionist at Oak Ridge Country Club. We weren't close friends, but once I'd fixed her car for free when her alternator died on the side of the highway. She picked up on the second ring. "Elena, you okay?" I told her everything, condensed but true, the uninvited Christmas, the fake family, the vandalism. There was a pause, then a quiet whistle. "People at Oak Ridge love gossip more than golf," she said. "You don't have to worry. I'll make sure this story travels. Maybe next time your parents hold their heads high in the dining hall, someone will remind them of the granddaughter they left behind." Finally, I dialed Elliot, a contact at the DMV. He owed me after I rebuilt his transmission in the dead of winter 2 years back. "Elena," he said when I finished, his voice heavy with sympathy. "I can't break laws, but I can make sure certain registrations get noticed. If Graham or anyone tied to him pulls stunts again, I'll flag it. Word spreads faster than you think." By the time I hung up, a strange calm settled over me. I hadn't yelled, hadn't lashed out, hadn't even seen my parents face to face since that night. But I had planted seeds in the soil they valued most. Reputation. Joe leaned against the counter, watching me. "You sure this won't backfire?" I shrugged. "Maybe it will, but I'm tired of being cornered. If they want to ruin me, they'll have to watch their own house crumble first." Her mouth quirked into the ghost of a smile. "That's the Elena I know." We spent the evening patching what we could, calling a tow, arranging a temporary ride for Maya to school, sweeping shards of rubber from the parking lot. All the while, I felt something building in my chest, not anger this time, but resolve. If my family believed they could strip me of worth, they were about to learn you can't erase someone who refuses to disappear. 2 nights later, while Maya was asleep with her stuffed dinosaur tucked under her arm, my phone buzzed with a notification from an unknown number. I almost ignored it. Spam, I thought. But the preview froze my breath. "Hi, are you Elena? I think we need to talk." I opened the thread. The sender introduced herself as Amber. My pulse jumped. I recognised the name from the Christmas photos, one of the blonde women draped over Graham's arm, smiling like she belonged. Her messages came rapid fire, as if she were afraid she'd lose her nerve if she stopped typing, "Your sister hired me." Well, technically your mum told her to, and your sister passed along the money. I was supposed to pretend to be a cousin. Graham was in on it too. But they never paid the second half. I have screenshots. Do you want them? My hands trembled as I typed back, "Yes, send everything." Seconds later, my screen filled with proof. Text threads between Sloane and Amber, negotiations about keeping it classy and not too obvious. Photos of envelopes with cash, promises of the rest after the holidays. And then the unanswered messages, Amber asking for her money, Sloane ignoring her. The bile rose in my throat. It wasn't just vanity. They had orchestrated the whole charade, stage managing our erasure like some grotesque theatre production. They had literally paid strangers to take our place. I thanked Amber, promised her I'd keep her name private. Her final message lingered with me. I thought I was just playing pretend for photos. But when I saw your dad smile at me like I belonged more than you did, it felt wrong. "I'm sorry." I set the phone down and pressed my palms to my eyes, the sting of betrayal sharp and hot. Every time I thought the wound had reached its depth, someone dug it deeper. Later that week, while searching for extra blankets in the hall closet, I dragged out an old cardboard box marked in my mother's handwriting, "Christmas decor." I pulled it onto the floor, dust puffing into the air. Inside were tangled lights, cracked ornaments, and folded tablecloths that smelled faintly of cedar. At the very bottom, beneath a yellowed cloth napkin, I found a photograph wedged between the pages of a brittle recipe book. The image stopped me cold. It was Christmas, clearly. Our living room, the same fireplace still standing in my parents' house today. My mother, younger by decades, sat stiffly on the couch, her smile tight. Next to her was a man I didn't recognise. His arm curved around her shoulders, possessive. His face, half hidden in shadow, carried a grin that wasn't festive, it was smug. But what froze me wasn't just his presence. It was the fact that my father wasn't in the picture at all. The back of the photo bore a date written in Marjorie's looping script, Christmas 1989. I stared at it until the edges blurred. Questions spiraled. Who was he? Why was his photo hidden away instead of in an album? Why keep it buried at the bottom of a box, unless it meant something forbidden? My stomach churned. I had spent years believing my parents' rejection was about me, about grease-stained hands, about choosing the garage over a degree. But what if it was deeper? What if they'd been crafting images for decades, burying mistakes under layers of refinement? I traced my mother's younger face with a trembling finger. She looked like she was trying too hard to smile, the way she still did at every dinner party. Had she been playing a role even then? The thought hollowed me. It wasn't just about this Christmas. It wasn't just about Maya or the truck. It was about a family built on appearances. One where truth was disposable if it threatened the facade. I tucked the photo back into the box, but the image clung to me long after. My pulse hammered as though I had stumbled into a secret too big for one person to hold. For the first time, I wondered if my parents' obsession with appearances wasn't simply about pride, but about survival. Maybe they weren't protecting reputation. They were hiding history. I leaned back against the wall, clutching the card Maya had made. "Grandpa, don't forget me." The irony cut deep. I wasn't just forgotten. I was deliberately replaced, just as my father might have been once, just as my mother might have tried to erase her own shame. The darkness of the apartment pressed closer. For a moment I let myself sink into the despair, the sense that even the foundation of my childhood memories had cracks running through it. The betrayal of the present was crushing enough. Now the past itself felt poisoned. Still, somewhere inside, a spark of resolve flickered. If they thought secrets and facades could bury me, they were wrong. For every photo they staged, every lie they told, I would drag the truth into the light. Because if my family's story had always been smoke and mirrors, then maybe it was time I stopped breathing their haze. The Sunday morning air was crisp, the kind that cut through your lungs and woke you up faster than coffee. I slid behind the wheel of the F-150, the engine humming beneath me like a secret waiting to be shouted. Maya sat in the back, bundled in her purple coat, clutching a thermos of hot chocolate like it was treasure. We drove to the old mall parking lot where the monthly cars and coffee meet always drew a crowd, gearheads, collectors, and wealthy hobbyists who like to show off their weekend toys. Usually I came in Joe's Mustang just to look, but today I had something better. Today wasn't about blending in. Today was about being seen. The lot was already buzzing with life, the air thick with the scent of exhaust and roasted beans from a coffee truck parked near the entrance. Rows of polished machines gleamed under the weak winter sun, classic Camaros, shiny Corvettes, even a Lamborghini that looked absurd against the cracked asphalt. I eased the F-150 into a prime spot near the centre row, heads turned immediately. "Isn't that a 2016?" someone muttered as I stepped out, my boots crunching on gravel. "Looks clean, real clean." Another man, older with a ball cap pulled low, whistled. "That's not stock. Those wheels." She put work into that. I caught the flickers of recognition spreading. A few faces lit up with realization, whispers carried in the cold air. "That's Eleanor Brooks. Isn't she the mechanic? Didn't her folks kick her out of Christmas?" I straightened my jacket, holding my head high. Let them talk. Let them piece it together. Maya hopped out, skipping in little circles, her laughter rising above the rumble of engines. She tugged at my sleeve. "Auntie, can we show them the cool seats?" "Of course, baby," I said, opening the door so she could climb inside and demonstrate how the back folded down into extra storage. She chatted excitedly while a small crowd gathered, nodding and murmuring. I didn't need to sell anything. The story sold itself. A woman, cast out by her own family, still managed to buy the kind of truck her father had been begging the universe for. Every smile from Maya, every grease stain on my jacket, every wordless truth etched itself into the scene. Beth, from the country club, must have been right. This town thrived on gossip. By the time I'd finished answering questions about the truck's specs and the hours I'd poured into affording it, half the lot had their phones out. Photos were snapped, videos uploaded. The whispers spread faster than exhaust on a cold morning. And whispers travelled. By evening, Oak Ridge was buzzing. I didn't have to be there to know. Joe texted me later with laughing emojis. "Your dad looked like he swallowed a lemon when guys at the club asked him how his loser daughter managed a truck nicer than his." He left early. I leaned back on the couch, reading the message twice, a bittersweet knot forming in my chest. This wasn't triumph, not exactly. I didn't take joy in embarrassing him. But part of me couldn't deny the grim satisfaction. For once, the truth had landed in their world, not just mine. The next day at work, a customer recognized me. You're the one with the F50, right? Saw it on Facebook. Damn fine machine. Guess hard work does pay off. I smiled politely, though inside a strange mixture swirled, validation and sorrow, pride and grief. Every kind word from a stranger only reminded me of the silence from my parents. Still, I couldn't stop the ripple. At Oak Ridge, the whispers grew sharper. Thomas couldn't refill his coffee without someone asking how it felt that his mechanic daughter had outdone him. Marjorie's bridge partners pursed their lips, pretending not to gossip, but everyone knew they were. What I hadn't expected was the shift in tone. People weren't just pitying me, they were questioning them. Questioning why grandparents would shut out a child like Maya. Questioning what kind of refinement required hiring strangers to pose for photos. The walls they'd built around themselves were cracking, and for the first time in years, I wasn't the one on the defensive. That night, I tucked Maya into bed and stood by the window, watching the snow drift under the streetlight. The F-150 sat in the lot below, gleaming even under layers of frost. For months, it had symbolised my desperate hope to be seen. Now it was something else entirely. A mirror they couldn't escape, reflecting the truth they'd tried so hard to bury. And as much as it hurt to admit, part of me was ready for the next step. Because if a truck and a few whispers could rattle their kingdom of appearances, what would happen when the deeper truths came to light? The following weekend, Oak Ridge Country Club held its Sunday brunch, the crown jewel of its social calendar. I didn't attend, of course. I wouldn't have been welcome even if I'd wanted to. But gossip travelled faster than the speed of champagne being poured, and by afternoon, the entire town knew what had happened. Amber told me herself later that evening, her voice still tinged with disbelief when she called. We walked in like we belonged, me and Lydia. We wore simple dresses, nothing flashy, just enough to blend. Then I saw your mother's table. I swear, Elena, she nearly dropped her fork when she spotted us. I could picture it clearly. The gleaming dining hall, crystal chandeliers reflecting against silver cutlery. Thomas stiff in his press jacket, Marjorie with her posture ramrod straight, Sloane pretending not to check her reflection in every spoon. They had built the scene to perfection. And then Amber and Lydia tore it open. Amber recounted every detail. She and Lydia walked straight past the servers, their heels clicking against the polished floor, and stopped right at the Brooks table. For a moment, silence thickened, every eye on them. Then Amber smiled brightly, leaning in just enough for the surrounding tables to hear. "Thank you so much," she said sweetly, "for hiring us to play cousins at your Christmas dinner. I hope the pictures turned out." The gasp that followed was louder than cutlery clinking. Lydia added her own barb, tilting her head innocently. "Next time, maybe pay on time. We're still waiting on the rest of the money." Thomas's face, Amber said, went scarlet, his hands tightening around his glass. Marjorie's lips twitched as if she'd been struck, her mask of refinement cracking in plain view. Sloane looked like she wanted to disappear into her chair. Amber and Lydia didn't linger. They straightened, offered a mock polite wave, and walked out, leaving whispers trailing in their wake like perfume. By the time dessert was served, the Brooks name was ash across every conversation. Necks craned, heads tilted, voices dropped to scandalized murmurs. "Did you hear? They paid women to pretend. And all while their granddaughter sat at home?" The perfect picture shattered in an instant. When Amber finished telling me, I sat in silence, one hand pressed against my temple. It should have felt like victory. For years I had been the black sheep, the whispered cautionary tale. Now It was them, exposed in the harsh light of truth. But the satisfaction was hollow, mingled with the ache of how far my parents had been willing to go. 2 days later, I was at the gas station filling up the borrowed sedan when a voice murmured beside me, "Your folks have always cared more about face than family." I turned to see a man I recognised vaguely from Oakridge, grey-haired, trim, a fixture of the club's card games. He lowered his voice further, eyes darting around as though afraid to be overheard. "You didn't hear it from me," he said, "but years back your parents were in deep. A debt that would have ruined them. Graham bailed them out. That's why they keep him close. Why they let him drag them into his schemes. They sold their pride a long time ago." The pump clicked, signalling the tank was full, but I stood frozen, his words heavier than the nozzle in my hand. A debt, of course. It explained the desperation, the endless hunger to appear untouchable. Refinement wasn't just pride, it was survival. They had traded their integrity to stay afloat, and now they were clinging to Graham like a lifeline, no matter how rotten. The man tipped his cap and walked away, leaving me staring at the reflection of my own face in the car window. For a long moment, the world blurred around me, the snow drifting in lazy spirals, the hiss of the pump, Maya's voice inside the car singing to herself. All I could see was the shape of my parents' choices. A family willing to sacrifice truth, dignity, even blood, if it meant no one else would glimpse the cracks. I slid back into the driver's seat, gripping the wheel tighter than necessary. Maya looked up with her bright, unknowing eyes. "Auntie, can we get cocoa?" I forced a smile. "Of course, baby." But inside, something shifted. The betrayal wasn't just about Christmas anymore. It wasn't about a truck or a dinner invitation. It was a lineage of lies, of debts covered in silk, of secrets painted over with glittering lights. They hadn't just abandoned me. They had abandoned truth itself, and I couldn't decide which hurt more. It was a Tuesday evening when my phone rang, the screen flashing, "Dad." For a moment I considered letting it buzz itself silent, the way I had every other time since Christmas. But something in me, maybe the stubborn curiosity of a daughter who still wanted answers, made me swipe to accept. "Eleanor." His voice was different, hoarse, stripped of its usual authority. "I need your help." I leaned against the workbench in Joe's garage, my hands still sticky with oil. "What happened?" "The truck. My truck. It died on the way to the club." A bitter laugh escaped before I could stop it. "Figures. That old thing's been begging for a grave for years." "This isn't funny," he snapped, but the usual bite was gone, replaced by weariness. "I had it towed to Tony's. He says the transmission's gone and there's rust everywhere. It'll cost a fortune to fix. I can't..." He stopped, exhaled shakily. Then, softer, the words I'd never heard before. "I'm sorry." I froze. 2 syllables, foreign on his tongue. For years, I had begged for them in 1,000 different ways. And now, delivered over the static of a phone line, they landed with a dull thud in my chest. "Sorry for what exactly?" I asked. "For Christmas, for what we did. For everything." The garage lights hummed above me. Joe glanced over, eyebrows raised, but didn't interrupt. I pressed the phone tighter to my ear. "Do you even understand what you're apologising for?" Silence stretched. Then, in a voice that sounded like gravel dragged across pavement, he said, "I know we hurt you, and Maya. We shouldn't have, but I need you now. Tony says maybe you can help." There it was, the truth. Not remorse, desperation. I swallowed hard. "You want my help? Fine, but here are my terms." "Eleanor, no." You don't get to interrupt. Not this time. You want me in your life? You want my hands to fix what you let rot? Then listen. I ticked them off one by one, my voice steadier than my racing pulse. 1. You apologise to Maya. Not vague, not some half smile. You tell her you were wrong, that she wasn't the problem, you were. 2. You admit what you did to me, to us. You say it out loud, no excuses. You chose appearances over your own granddaughter. 3. Sloane gets a real job. No more riding Graham's coattails or hiring strangers to fill a table. She earns her place the way the rest of us do. 4. You pay me back for the damage to my car, tyres, paint, everything. I don't care who swung the knife. You carry the blame. And 5. We have dinner once a month at my apartment. You eat what I cook, you sit at my table, you play with Maya. No country club gloss, no silk napkins, just family. You want my help? That's the price. On the other end, I heard only breathing, ragged and uneven. That's blackmail, he muttered finally. No, I said, my voice sharp as a wrench on steel. Blackmail would be sending those screenshots from Amber to the Oak Ridge board. This is called boundaries, something you've never respected until now. A cough, maybe from him, maybe from the silence itself. And if I say no? Then you find someone else to fix your truck, but we both know no one will give you the deal I would. And we both know your reputation can't take another hit. Joe leaned closer, whispering, You okay? I nodded slightly, though my insides shook. My father sighed, long and weary. I'll talk to your mother. Not good enough, I cut in. This isn't about her alone. This is about you. Do you accept? For the first time in my life, Thomas Brooks hesitated, then almost too quietly to catch. I'll think about it. No, I said firmly. You'll decide, because if you don't, then consider this the last conversation we ever have. The line went dead. I lowered the phone, my breath coming in harsh bursts. Across the garage, Joe gave a low whistle. Damn, Elena, she said, you finally drew the line. I sank onto the stool, exhaustion crashing over me. My father's apology had been hollow, maybe even transactional, but my terms, those were solid steel. For once, I wasn't begging for love. I was demanding respect. And whether he could give it or not would determine if there was any road left back to family. 2 nights later, my phone lit up again, this time with Mom. For a long while I stared at the screen, thumb hovering, half tempted to let it go dark, but something in me, that small stubborn thread of curiosity, pressed accept. Elena, Marjorie's voice came through, thin and tight. Your father told me what you demanded. Boundaries, I corrected, not demands. Boundaries you should have respected years ago. There was a pause, heavy enough to make me wonder if she'd hang up. Then, to my surprise, her voice cracked. Do you know why I care so much about appearances? Why refinement matters to me? I didn't answer. Because once, she whispered, I lost everything, and I couldn't survive it happening again. Her words spilled haltingly, as though each one scraped on the way out. Years ago, when you were still in high school, your father and I took on debts we couldn't pay. Graham stepped in. He kept us afloat when the banks were ready to take the house. But the shame, Elena, the whispers, the eyes on me at the club, the pity from neighbours, I thought I would drown. I stopped sleeping. Every knock on the door sent my heart into a panic. The doctor called it anxiety, but it felt like fire under my skin. Refinement was the only shield I had left. If we looked perfect, maybe no one would see how broken we were. I sat down hard on the couch. The phone pressed so tight against my ear it hurt. This was a side of my mother I had never known. Not cold, not cruel, but terrified. "So you decided," I said slowly, "that hiding the truth was more important than holding your family close." Her breath hitched. "I know it was wrong. I know. But it felt safer than facing judgment again." And when I saw Sloane with Graham, I thought, maybe she'd protect us from falling back into that darkness. The words throbbed with a pathetic kind of logic, not justification, but explanation. "I'm not asking for your forgiveness," she added. "I'm telling you why I can't let go of this need to appear whole." I rubbed my temples, the photo of the strange man from the Christmas box flashing in my mind. Secrets piled on secrets, all in service of this brittle facade. "Mom," I said finally, "you're not protecting us. You're burying us alive." She didn't argue. Only silence answered me, silence heavy with something that almost sounded like surrender. That night, after I put Maya to bed, I rummaged through the same box of old decorations again, restless. My fingers brushed against another folded scrap, yellowed with time. It wasn't a photo this time, it was a letter. Rachel's handwriting, instantly recognizable, curved across the page. My chest tightened as I read, "Elena, if the day comes when Mom and Dad choose their image over us, don't forget what matters. Don't beg for their pride. Don't twist yourself into knots for their approval. All we need, all Maya will ever need, is respect. Promise me you'll demand it, even if it hurts." I pressed the paper against my chest, tears streaking hot down my face. Rachel had known. Somehow, even before she was gone, she had sensed the cracks in our family's foundation. And she had trusted me to stand firm when the walls caved in. The ache in my heart was unbearable, but beneath it burned clarity. This wasn't just about my conditions anymore. It was about honouring Rachel's words, about protecting Maya from the cycle of shame and silence. The next evening, when Thomas called again, I didn't hesitate. "Have you decided?" I asked. He sighed long and weary. "Your mother told me things I didn't know she'd share. We don't like your conditions, but..." His voice cracked. "We'll do it. We'll try." I closed my eyes, clutching the letter so tightly it crumpled. "Good," I said softly, "because this isn't a negotiation. It's survival. For Maya, for me, maybe even for you." He didn't argue. And for once, I didn't feel like the child begging for scraps. I felt like the one holding the line. Rachel's words echoed in me as I hung up. All we need is respect. I had drawn the boundaries. Now it was time to see if they could live within them. The night of the first dinner came sooner than I expected. My tiny apartment smelled of garlic and tomato sauce, the simmering pot of spaghetti bubbling gently on the stove. The oven ticked as the last tray of Maya's cookies baked, their uneven shapes spreading across the pan. She had insisted on making them herself, her tongue poking out in concentration as she pressed chocolate chips into the dough. "Auntie, do you think Grandma will like them?" she asked, holding up a lopsided star that looked more like a blob. "She'll love them," I said, kissing the top of her head, "because you made them." Still, my stomach twisted with nerves. For all their promises, I didn't know how tonight would go. Would they show up? Would they sneer at my mismatched plates and thrift store chairs? Or would they finally try to meet me here, on my ground, without the armour of chandeliers and polished silver? At 6 sharp, a knock sounded at the door. My pulse spiked. Maya ran ahead, flinging it open with the exuberance only a child could muster. Thomas and Marjorie stood there, coats dusted with snow. My father looked smaller somehow, shoulders slumped under the weight of something more than cold. My mother clutched a casserole dish, her eyes red-rimmed, as though she had been crying before she even arrived. Behind them, Sloane shifted awkwardly, a manila folder clutched to her chest. "Grandma! Grandpa!" Maya squealed, launching herself into Marjorie's arms. My mother gasped, clutching her granddaughter tight as tears spilled freely down her cheeks. "I'm so sorry, darling," she whispered, rocking Maya as though trying to make up for lost years in one embrace. "Grandma was wrong. Can you forgive me?" Maya giggled, burying her face in Marjorie's scarf. "Of course, Grandma." I swallowed hard, turning back to the stove so they wouldn't see the tears stinging my eyes. Thomas cleared his throat. He lingered by the door for a moment before stepping forward, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. "Eleanor," he said, voice rough, I don't know how to do this right, but I need to say I was wrong about Christmas, about a lot of things. I should have been there for you, for Maya. I wasn't, and I'm sorry." The words were awkward, stilted, but real. I met his gaze across the small kitchen, and for the first time I saw not a judge or critic, but a man trying to swallow his pride. Dinner was clumsy, but warm. We ate spaghetti from chipped bowls, the sauce staining the edges of the thrifted tablecloth. Marjorie praised Maya's cookies as if they were the finest pastries in Paris. Thomas refilled everyone's water glasses without being asked. Even Sloane, usually so sharp with sarcasm, sat quiet, her hands folded around that folder. Halfway through, she slid it across the table toward me. "It's my application," she said softly, "for the grocery store. Joe said they're hiring. I want to try." I blinked, stunned. My sister, who had always clung to shortcuts, to men with fat wallets, was holding out a step towards something different. "That's good," I said, my voice thick. "It's a start." She nodded, her eyes downcast, cheeks flushed with shame or maybe resolve. After dinner, Maya tugged both grandparents into the living room for a game of charades. She giggled uncontrollably when Thomas pretended to be a dinosaur, arms bent like tiny claws, stomping across the rug. Marjorie clapped like a child herself, her earlier tears replaced by laughter. I leaned against the doorway, arms folded, watching the scene unfold. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't even close. But it was something. A beginning. When the evening wound down, I walked them to the door. Marjorie hugged me tightly, her voice muffled against my shoulder. "Thank you for letting us in. We'll do better, I promise." Thomas lingered a moment, his hand resting awkwardly on my arm. "Your spaghetti," he said gruffly, "beats the club's prime rib." I smiled faintly. "Don't push it, Dad." They left into the snowy night, Sloane clutching her folder, my parents holding hands like two people trying to relearn what it meant to be a family. I closed the door and leaned against it, exhaling a long, shaky breath. My chest ached, but not from the usual emptiness. This time it was from the fragile weight of hope. After the door shut and the night swallowed my parents, Maya darted back into the kitchen, her little feet pattering against the floor. "Auntie," she called, "can I help clean up?" I smiled and nodded, handing her a damp cloth. She hummed to herself as she wiped crumbs from the table, her pigtails bouncing. For a few quiet minutes, the apartment was filled with nothing but the soft clink of dishes and the warm smell of cookies lingering in the air. Then Maya tugged at the tablecloth. Something heavy thudded to the floor. She bent down and lifted a small cardboard box, its edges frayed, the kind of thing I hadn't seen in years. She looked up at me with wide eyes. "What's this?" I froze. The box was one Rachel had packed away before the accident, tucked among old decorations and keepsakes. My chest tightened as I took it from Maya's hands and carried it carefully to the couch. Inside, beneath a faded ornament shaped like a snowflake, was an envelope with my name written in Rachel's familiar scrawl. The sight of it made my breath catch. My fingers trembled as I tore it open. "Eleanor," it began, "if the day comes when Mum and Dad choose their image over us, don't harden your heart completely. They will fail, but if they learn to change, if they really try, please find it in you to forgive. Maya will need grandparents. You will need peace. Don't carry their mistakes forever. Let them carry their own weight, but don't let bitterness be your inheritance. All we need is love that learns how to repair." Tears blurred the words until I could hardly read. Rachel had written this long before she was gone, as though she knew the fault lines in our family would eventually split wide. Her voice reached across years, steadying me in a way I hadn't realized I needed. I folded the letter carefully, pressing it to my heart. Around me, the apartment felt both fragile and sacred, like the moment might shatter if I moved too fast. When I finally looked up, Maya was watching me curiously. "Is it from Mommy?" she asked softly. "Yes, sweetheart," I whispered, "from your mommy." She climbed into my lap, her warmth grounding me. "What did she say?" "That we should forgive if people really try to change." Maya nodded with the simple wisdom only a child could carry. "That sounds like Mommy." I hugged her tightly, my tears dampening her hair. "It does," I said. The following weeks were quieter than I expected. My father stopped by one evening with a plain envelope, sliding it across the counter without ceremony. Inside was cash, enough to cover the first replacement tyre. "I'll get you the rest," he muttered, avoiding my eyes. "It'll take time." It wasn't much, but it was something, a beginning, a step toward accountability. Marjorie, true to her word, showed up at every one of Maya's T-ball games, bundled in scarves and gloves, a thermos of hot cocoa in her hands. She cheered loudly, clapping even when Maya missed the ball entirely. The other parents gave her curious glances, some whispering, but she didn't flinch. For once, refinement took a backseat to love. And Sloane, slowly, awkwardly, began to change too. She actually showed up for her shifts at the grocery store, even when the hours were long, and the pay unimpressive. She complained, of course, but there was a determination behind her words I hadn't seen before. Sometimes she even stopped by my apartment, carrying a bag of discounted produce she'd snagged from work. "Thought you could use this," she'd say, sheepish, before joining us for dinner. I watched it all unfold with cautious hope. The wounds were still there, deep and raw, but Rachel's letter echoed in my mind every time I felt the old bitterness rise. Let them carry their own weight, but don't let bitterness be your inheritance. One night, after tucking Maya into bed, I sat alone at the table with the letter spread out before me. I thought of Rachel, of her laughter, her steady hands guiding me when I faltered. I thought of how fiercely she had loved Maya, how she had trusted me to carry that love forward. And I thought of the fragile, fumbling attempts my parents were making now. Forgiveness wasn't easy. It didn't erase the pain or excuse the damage. But maybe, just maybe, it could build something sturdier on the ruins. I folded the letter carefully, sliding it back into the box. The ache in my chest hadn't disappeared, but it had softened, like a wound beginning to scar. For the first time in months, I felt the faintest flicker of peace. 6 months slipped by like water through my fingers, marked not by estrangement, but by rhythm. Once a month, without fail, my parents came to my apartment for dinner. No chandeliers, no polished silver, no country club chatter, just my thrift store table. Maya's drawings taped to the fridge. And food that tasted of effort rather than elegance. At first, the dinners were stiff. Thomas fumbled with small talk. Marjorie overcompensated with compliments about the spaghetti, or the cookies. Maya insisted on baking. Sloane avoided eye contact, busying herself with dishes after each meal, but slowly the sharp edges dulled. Silence turned into stories, awkwardness into laughter. The apartment began to hold the sound of something I had thought lost. Family. Imperfect, but present. One Saturday morning in spring, I watched from the porch as Thomas stood in the park with Maya. He showed her how to grip the baseball bat, his hands guiding hers, his voice low and patient. She swung too early, missed completely, and burst into giggles. Instead of frowning, he laughed too, retrieving the ball with surprising agility for his age. "Try again, champ," he said, tossing it gently. "Eyes on the ball." I leaned against the railing, arms folded, my chest tightening at the sight. For years I had begged him to see me, to guide me, to show up. He hadn't, but here he was, finally giving Maya what he had denied me. And though part of me still ached, another part softened. Maybe that was enough. Marjorie transformed in her own way. She became a fixture at every one of Maya's T-ball games, sitting on fold-out chairs beside Joe and me. She didn't just clap politely. She brought snacks, coolers full of juice boxes, and sandwiches, enough for the whole team. She fussed over scraped knees, wrapped blankets around shivering kids, and laughed when Maya sprinted the wrong way around the bases. The other parents whispered at first, recognizing her from Oak Ridge, puzzled at the sight of a woman once obsessed with refinement passing out peanut butter sandwiches on a dusty field. But Marjorie didn't flinch. She poured her energy into the role of grandmother, as though making up for lost time, and in a way, maybe she was. Sloane, too, began to change. At the grocery store, she worked her shifts without complaint, or at least with less of it than before. Her manager promoted her to shift lead after 3 months, a small step that she wore like a medal. She came to dinner with tired eyes and calloused hands, proof that she was finally learning what it meant to earn something. One night, she set a bag of groceries on my counter, grinning shyly. "Employee discount," she said. "Figured you could use it." It wasn't much, but it was real, and that, I realized, mattered more than anything expensive Graham had ever given her. Through it all, the F-150 sat parked in my lot, gleaming even under layers of dust. I kept it running, taking it out once a week to keep the engine alive. Every time my father visited, his eyes lingered on it. He never asked, never demanded, never even hinted. But I saw the longing there, the quiet ache. And maybe, just maybe, that was part of the lesson. He had once believed he was entitled to it. Now he understood it wasn't his to claim. It was mine to give if I ever chose. One evening after dinner, as we washed dishes together, Marjorie glanced at me. "Your father's different, isn't he?" she asked softly. I shrugged, drying a plate. "He's trying. That's all I ever wanted." Her gaze drifted to Maya, sprawled on the rug with crayons, humming to herself. "She saved us," Marjorie whispered. "That little girl saved us all." I didn't answer, but in my heart, I knew she was right. The summer wore on, and our monthly dinners became less about obligation and more about habit. Thomas told old stories, Marjorie brought new recipes, Sloane sometimes even cracked jokes that made us laugh until our sides hurt. It wasn't perfect, there were still shadows, still cracks, but the house of cards they had built was gone. In its place, something sturdier, something closer to real. And though the F-150 remained untouched, waiting, I began to wonder if maybe the day would come when it would change hands, not out of desperation, not as a bribe, but as a symbol, a gift freely given, not demanded. That thought stayed with me as autumn approached, the air cooling, the first hints of frost touching the mornings. Another Christmas loomed on the horizon, but this time the thought didn't fill me with dread. This time it felt like the promise of something new. Father's Day dawned bright and warm, the kind of June morning where the air smelled of cut grass and the world felt freshly scrubbed. Maya bounded into my room before I'd even finished my first cup of coffee, her hair tangled from sleep, her grin wide. "Auntie," she whispered conspiratorially, "is today the surprise?" I smiled, pressing a finger to my lips. "Yes, but we have to set it up just right." For weeks, I had debated this moment. My heart tugged in two directions. Part of me wanted to hold on to the F-150 forever. A symbol of all the nights I'd sacrificed, the pride I'd built without their approval. But Rachel's letter echoed louder than my pride. "If they learn to change, if they really try, please find it in you to forgive." And I had seen them try. Slowly, imperfectly, but genuinely. By mid-afternoon, the truck gleamed in the parking lot, washed and waxed until the silver paint shone like new. Maya helped me tie the oversized red bow across the hood, her fingers fumbling with the ribbon. It sat crooked but perfect in its imperfection. When Thomas and Marjorie arrived for dinner, they looked tired but content, carrying bags of groceries to contribute. Thomas's gaze, as always, lingered on the truck outside before he forced himself to look away. He didn't ask. He never asked any more. After we finished eating, grilled chicken, corn on the cob, and the cookies Maya insisted on baking again, I stood, heart pounding. "Come outside," I said. They followed me to the lot where the F-150 waited in the golden evening light. For a moment, no one spoke. The only sound was the rustle of leaves in the breeze. Then I pressed the keys into my father's calloused hand. His eyes widened, his mouth parting as though he couldn't breathe. "Eleanor." His voice cracked, rougher than I'd ever heard it. "No, this isn't, it's yours," I said softly. "Not because you demanded it. Not because you earned it with money, because you've tried to earn it with something else. Respect, showing up, apologizing, loving Maya." He stared at the keys, then at me, then at the truck, his body trembling. And then, to my shock, tears spilled down his cheeks. My father, the man who had once sneered at my choices, who had valued refinement above all else, stood in the fading sunlight and wept. Marjorie pressed a hand to her mouth, her own tears streaming, while Maya slipped into her arms. "Grandma, don't cry," she whispered, hugging her tight. I swallowed hard, my own voice unsteady. I don't need a perfect family. I don't need wealth or appearances. I just need a family who knows how to say they're sorry, who tries to do better. Thomas nodded, clutching the keys to his chest as though they were life itself. "I'm sorry, Eleanor," he choked out, "for all of it, for every year I didn't see you, for every time I made you feel less. Thank you. Thank you for not giving up on us." Maya wriggled free from Marjorie's arms and ran to me, tugging my sleeve. "Auntie," she asked, her voice small but bright, "can we have Christmas here this year, at our home, with spaghetti and cookies and the tree?" My breath caught. The question landed heavier than anything my parents had said, because it was simple and pure. A child asking for belonging. A child asking for home. I crouched down, cupping her face in my hands. "Yes, sweetheart," I said, my voice breaking into a smile. "This year, Christmas will be here, at our home. Her eyes lit up and she squealed, throwing her arms around my neck. Behind her, I saw my parents watching, their faces wet with tears, their shoulders slumped, not with shame this time, but with relief. The circle had closed, from being cast out of their house to building my own, from being erased from their table to being the one who set the terms, from forgotten to chosen. That night, after everyone left, I stood by the window, watching the F-150 gleam under the streetlight. My father would drive it now, but it no longer represented the approval I once craved. It represented choice. My choice to give, my choice to forgive, my choice to build something new. And for the first time in years, the future felt not like a wound, but like a door opening wide.